Hi, good evening to all our viewers on FTTV as well as DM Online and all the Facebook fans of both Daily FT and the Daily Mirror to what would be a fairly interesting discussion under the new series of Leaders League. Today, we are bringing four outstanding leaders to share their insights in terms of progressing amidst the pandemic. People are talking about a new normal, but I think it's beyond the new normal because it's so uncertain. What ahead is also very challenging. So today we have Shiromal Kure, chairperson of Jetwing Travels and Jetwing Hotels, Sashi Jasim, senior deputy general manager from Sampath Bank, Kasturi Wilson from Hemas Holdings Group CEO, and Sandamini Pereira, co-chairperson from Prime Group. I'd like to structure this discussion from how did these great ladies manage the pandemic, particularly the third wave, not the first or the second wave, the current third wave, and there is fear about a fourth wave, but how did they manage from an organizational perspective, and individually what were the challenges as leaders of the organization, and then we'll move on to more broader industry and economic issues. So I'd like to invite Sashi to share own briefly how did Sampath Bank manage in the pandemic and what were the key challenges?
Nista, the most challenge was to give customers uninterrupted service while safeguarding and ensuring the safety of our team as well as the customers. Now, in this context, Sampath Bank, since we have been investing in technology for a long time, as you know that Sampath Bank was in the forefront, and we were the people who introduced technology into the country. Not only my bank, the whole industry was investing, but what we saw was that there was no usage, not the maximum usage of those IT investment. The pandemic, to an extent, I would say, was a blessing in disguise because a lot of our customers started utilizing those platforms, and that became quite easy for us to continue our services. That's from the customer side. But talking about deploying our HR team members, we were able to immediately set up the infrastructure to facilitate the distant work. Working from home culture was brought in, and that is how we managed the pandemic immediately. Having said that, as you ask, going forward, I would think becoming the organization more agile is the way forward, and that is a key strategic priority Sampath Bank is looking at.
Okay, thank you. Kasturi, I'll move on to you. What were the key learnings? Because as an organization, what the pandemic was never experienced. We have had other challenges, but from your perspective, what were the key learning from an organizational perspective during the pandemic?
I think continuing from Sashi, I guess the learnings kind of evolved from lockdown 1, 2, and 3, right? But the biggest learning is having a purpose in the center in all we do. So what I mean by that is, so our purpose means we say make healthful living happen. What it means is we want every family to impact them and make them feel better. So when you tell that, you have to function as a domestic operator. You have to make sure your health products, which are in the healthcare and consumer brands, are accessible. So factories have to work. How can our employees be safe? That was the same challenges we had. But being in healthcare, you kind of over-invest. But the biggest learning we had was, in lockdown 1, is you break up the decision-making to the lowest level. And you trust that they'll do the right thing. So that you call it agile teams or whatever you call it, we empower them to take decisions because they are at the closest to the consumer, the closest to the heart of the problem. So we broke that up, and now actually it runs. Nobody really comes rolling up the problem to the higher ups too much. The other one was that they knew the new normal is this uncertainty. You don't know who the enemy is, but that's the biggest lesson. So you move forward. So we invested in growth during this time. We thought about medium-term plans, and the environment, the normal was in this uncertain condition, right? And when you fast track, and the third biggest problem is, look, being a Sri Lankan company operating Sri Lanka, you have to understand what the community is going through. Just because our company, our people were employed, we actually had to understand what they were going through. So when you fast track to lockdown 3, we were consistently doing the things we were doing throughout last few years, but we were doing something different. We were innovating new products, so that was going on. Lockdown 3 came is, I think, what you said was, when you asked me, when people came from Aurudu, we took a call that people have gone, celebrated, however much we had this concept that you take ownership for your safety and your neighbor's safety. We had given so much of education, it cannot be a rule. So we said, be responsible. It's your choice to be safe, your choice to keep your colleagues safe and your community safe. So when they came back, we have a culture, you have to acknowledge you have gone out. We said, fine, you've gone out and come, you test. So we tested. At that point, we realized the first time in our 1 year, we had about 10 positive cases. And then there was like, okay, that's happened, that's normal. You quarantine, the others take over the shifts. So the third, what we realized, what we've been doing and doing throughout, when this happened, that was the biggest disruption for us internally. Teams kind of were fluid. They volunteered, cross businesses. Like I remember the healthcare, the pharmaceutical warehouse had like 10 people who were quarantined and because of the contact. But the stationery Atlas brand warehouse team volunteered to come and work. So we found that previously, the lesson learned was previously we would have been working in silos. Now they came together because this information, and they knew that they were working together. So biggest lesson learned is trust people at the bottom, empower them, focus on growth, push them to think new even during uncertain times, because you don't know certainly whether this is going to end. And I'm sure going another 3 months, you're going to have another challenge. And how do you move forward? Keeping the purpose in the center, I remember when third lockdown happened, as a community, there was a bigger issue. We had families who didn't have food. And suddenly, some businesses said, look, we have our community struggling with a different problem because the trucks are not coming. Nobody even quantified what it's going to cost. All we said was all communities around wherever we are, so we have about 6-7 locations, Dankoto, wherever we are, please make sure that all communities don't have food, get dry rations. And they had given, I think over 2,000, 3,000 families were fed for that 1 month or so. But only afterwards I saw the P&L impact. But we never questioned the P&L impact before doing the right thing. So that was because there was a purpose. So I guess that was a big lesson.
Thank you, Kasturi. I move on to Shiromal. You're coming from a largely travel-based company. What was your learning? Because you are an industry which really got impacted directly.
Yeah, so Ayubowan everyone, and thank you, Nista. So yes, ours was the worst hit industry, and the impact is still felt because it hasn't got resolved yet for us. But one of the things that I saw, as Kasturi said, is the human spirit. It's indomitable. You know that however down you are, you can get up and you can get on with life. So that I saw amazingly in our teams, because naturally they were down. We were all very down. So one of the first things we had to do was to look at our cash flows, because we had a situation where there was no revenue. We have a travel section and a hotel section. Hotels at least had the local business, and we were very thankful for the local business. We had a lot of patronage from the domestic market, but the travel business was zero. So which meant even teams did not earn anything extra by way of tips or service charge or any such thing. So whilst we were managing our cash flows, we also had to teach our teams to manage their cash flows, because they were also getting impacted. So when we tried to do the cash flow, we realized that our costs had to be obviously trimmed down. So we had, and then we also realized at an early stage, we were lucky, we made that decision at the beginning in April last year, that this was not going to be a short-term thing. Every time else, whether it was a tsunami or the Easter bombing, we knew within a couple of months we can recover. But this time we realized we couldn't. So we had, and then we also knew even when it took off, we thought it would be a year, now it's taken more than a year, that business would not be the same as it was before. That numbers would take a time to grow back to the pre-pandemic. So we had too many people, obviously. So we had to right-size the company, which we had to do. So telling the team that some of you may have to go, and we had to also tell, we also took pay cuts. Everybody took pay cuts. So all of that was a very difficult thing to do. But as I said before, talking to people, that they understand everything, and how they adapt, and about the human spirit being, everybody was in the same thing. So how we got out of it, or how we are working to getting out of it, is amazing. And I also agree with the fluidity, how teams, it all becomes one. And we started looking at things as a project. So for a particular project, there were people from different units coming together. And the hotel teams were incredible. We were trying to grow. Every little inch of land we had, we've been growing. And that was actually Hiran's initiative. And including the general manager, got down, wore a pair of shorts, and they're all out there growing. So it's a very different experience, and we learned how people will adapt, and people will all understand and come together, rally around to get out of a difficult situation.
Thank you. Sandhamini, over to you. I know you are one of the largest property developer with a growing portfolio. What kind of a disruption did the organization go through, and how did you manage that?
Like other ones, we also faced many challenges, but mainly our biggest challenge was construction, because as you said, one of the largest developer in this country. So at the moment, we do 2,650,000 square feet. We do constructions. So over thousands of people are working in our sites. So imagine suddenly if you can't stop when the construction sites, if we have to close down. So I will share with you one example, our largest project at Ward Place. So there we do 850,000 square feet. Then at any given time, over 750 people are working there. So the biggest issue was their health and how we can get them to the site. So what we did, we know there's no any other things than vaccination. So 90% of the people we vaccinated, and now they are working on a bubble. Now it's moving. So in the same time, it's affected our sales as well, because when we take FMCG or medicine, so any other products online, you can just do your sales. But even a house or a apartment units, whatever, it's a very high involvement product, and that will be your biggest investment in your life. So how can you sell it online? So we thought what we have to do at this time. So then normally, anyway, when we launch a project, what we do, we call our customers and we invite and we gather and do the presentations. Maximum will be 100 or 150 people. But we change it, and we did our last project, Nigambu 1. We did it virtual launch, and it was very successful. Over 500 people were online with Zoom and Facebook, and we did it very well. So you have to change your strategies time to time.
Okay, yeah. Interesting. I'm going to sort of challenge you in terms of if this is the new normal and you all have had experience from the first, second, and the third wave. Can pandemic be an excuse for not growing going forward? If it's going to be there for some time, can companies sort of put it as an excuse? Because I know despite the war, the companies grew, country grew. Are we coming to a situation where in the future, pandemic will be just mentioned as something that is permanent, and it can't be cited an excuse for underperforming? Can the panel sort of share that? Is that very much alive in the management level?
Nista, pandemic we consider as a short-term disruption to our work style. Representing the finance industry, I would say that we just changed the mechanism, maybe the delivery part of it. But our work went on like that. And as you know, the finance industry is very important. Anyway, banks can't close. We are 24/7, 365. My colleagues.
But you did close for a couple of days.
Now you have mentioned that, when the third wave hit, the patient numbers were too high. I believe everybody got excited, so as the government and the authorities. So earlier, wave 1, wave 2, we were given exemptions. The finance sector was considered as essential, and the traveling was allowed. So everything was smooth. But the third wave came, the authorities didn't mention that we as an essential service, so we were actually stopped by opening the branches. I must tell you that it was just that the branches could not open for a couple of days. That was again not because the bankers didn't want to do so, that we have to abide by the country's rules. But banking happened, it continued the way that we used to do. The customers were not allowed to come in, but that was also sorted. The regulator got involved, and thereafter we continued to serve clients physically. Your earlier question, if you look at the Q1 results, banks have done fairly well. The reason is that we continue to service our customers fairly well.
Yeah.
No, we take that. I mean, obviously the businesses are stressed, so there is impact on our P&L and the balance sheet. But we understand the individual cases. We go into the details of the customers. So we restructure our facilities. There is impairment cost also. But we are hopeful, and I personally believe this is a transitional period.
Okay.
And we can come out very well.
Kasturi, you had some comments?
So I think from our side or corporates at the moment, we need to invest to grow. And pandemic or any disruption, from my experience, every time there is a disruption to the ecosystem, there's going to be opportunities, because you have to understand what the new landscape is. So here the consumers have changed. The consumer, unfortunately, Sri Lankan consumers' spending power has reduced. Their requirements, their basic requirements, priorities would have reduced. The way they consume has reduced. The way they entertain themselves has changed. So in that context, I think if we are really viewing the consumer and creating products and services to solve them, then yes, there is growth. Now, if you look at healthcare, I mean, digital ways of accessing products as well as accessing consultations has changed. So I believe, and during these times, you have to invest to grow. You have to think progressively. What is new out there? What can you do? Whether it's Sri Lanka or Bangladesh, we have been looking at that. But the problem here is, I think, given our context of our economy, the SMEs were the ones who struggle, because it's easy to say you want to grow, easy to say to invest. The access to capital at that level is going to be tough. And is there a responsible way where the bigger corporates can support SMEs in some ways of using them for R&D and helping them to come out through some partnerships. But that's some way we are looking at. But for your main question, I think disruptions, pandemic, I don't know whether it's short term, long term, and what form or shape it's going to take. But during uncertain times, consumption patterns will change, consumers' priorities will change, but they would still consume, they'll have needs. So you need to produce, or you have to create stuff relevant to them.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to move the discussion to something more personal. I want the panel to answer. I mean, everyone had this extraordinary time. In your view, what was the most challenging leadership skill that you faced in managing the pandemic, personally as well as as a corporate leader? Is it possible to share your personal challenges in terms of, whether did it sort of test your patience, did it test your, the art of forgiving people because of these times, or what was the real challenge from a leadership perspective?
Even during the war period, we did our business, we worked. But this time it's completely different. When I take our staff, our colleagues, I realize there is a big uncertainty, stress, fear of future. There are so many issues. So I realized what they need is assurance and job security, because time to time they are hearing some of their friends lost the job and cost salary cutting, so many things. So stopped everything and talk to them personally, sometimes even one-to-one, as a group, area-wise. Each and every person I spoke to personally and build their confidence. Don't worry, as a team we'll face this. And you are working, even if we are going another 5 months lockdown, don't worry, you will get your salary. Likewise, I motivate them a lot, and I think they motivated. They came up with so many strategies, then cost reductions from their own, and this year is one of our financial year was one of the best years. So even they got 4 months bonuses as well. They deserve it.
Okay.
So that is one of
Interesting. So can employees of Jetwing join your company?
Of course, yes.
Kasturi, what was the most challenging?
So this to lay context, when I was coming in as CEO, when the conversation was had and agreed, and I was planning on how I could take HEMAS to the next level, thinking of long-range planning, and then COVID hits, and I've been spending time for about 5-6 months, doing my plans and stuff, and the entire landscape changed. Remember, we were coming out of an Easter Sunday issue, and then we had just come out of it, we had recovered, and COVID hit. So as a leader, personally, my challenge was, how do I reset my mind? How I had to change the way I looked at things. The old papers were thrown away, and what is this new cards I've been dealt? How do I leverage on this? So once I overcome, and within that, how do I find the silver lining and push these people through? So the biggest challenge I think I felt was, because for me, as an individual, I'm bold or courageous or whatever you call it. I want to do more. I want to do, even within uncertain times, how do we come out of it, right? How do I get this entire lot of people who had, we've been having seen tough years, how do I get them to believe that they can do it? How do I get all of them to say, forget all what's happening while we are being safe? Can you dream big in uncertain times? So it took about, say, 1 month or 2 to get my leadership team to let go and dream big. And then we kind of nailed it for a couple of 12 months or 24 months, and that's the unlock you saw. I think they innovated more products than we've ever innovated in the last so many years, or ever innovated. I think launched 5 or 6 new products here and Bangladesh. And the most important part, the challenge was, as an individual leader, your personal values is a lot of reflective whether you can get the organization to also kind of align to it. And as a human being, I can't watch communities struggle and us being as business. So we kind of, while we were going through tough times, we also were committed to say, look, as individuals, if you want the company to support any community, we are there for that. And I was given the license to do that because I said that's a big part of who I am, and can the company also? Then it was aligned to the purpose. So for me, getting those three challenges, and now that the team has actually understood my mindset, they believe that they can do it, getting this team to believe, it works. So the old plans were thrown. And
I hope you didn't destroy those plans anyway. You can always
I
go
don't
back.
think they're relevant anymore given the context, yes.
Okay, Sashi, what would we give coming from a banking industry?
Nista, we are a systematically important bank and we manage 1 trillion assets with 4,000 employees and more than 3 million client base. So these 4,000 employees, looking after them was the key, because as my colleagues also said, there was a lot of they were suspecting whether, because we asked most of them to come to work. I mean, that baby became essential service. So at their places, they were the only people going out to work. So they were worried about their kids and their parents. So we had to give them the comfort, don't worry, that we have the infrastructure in place, that you will be looked after. So I myself found a lot of, my subordinates coming into my room and asking, Madam, why should we come? You know, the others don't come to work. So that kind of a thing. But the fact is that later they all understood that why we called essential is because we have to drive the economy. Because otherwise, if we had stopped our functions, there wouldn't have been any transactions happening. Not only within the country, we manage foreign transactions as well. So we have to keep the entire setup going. So understand, when they understanding, I think that responsiveness is the key, and giving the comfort to them that you are looked after. So that motivated them to come, and then later I found that they started feeling proud about it, because they felt as much as the medical fraternity that we also did something well, and that we managed the situation and that helped the country at large. So that was giving a good message, and I feel happy about it. And then going on to the customers, we were thinking how these old age customers, how can they be treated? Where the younger generation and more tech savvy people had the infrastructure in place for them to do transactions. But there is still a certain segment of customers who like brick and mortar and coming to the bank, talking to us, do their transactions. So how are we going to manage them? So we went to the extent of using some transport companies to and deliver cash to their doorstep, which was considered as a great service by most of our customers, because the mobile machines that we deployed could not go into door to door. I mean, they covered part of the areas, but not up to the house. So we activated our call centers, and thereby people could give calls, and then it transformed into a cash delivery mechanism. So all in all, I think that kind of initiations helped public at large, as well as our teams to feel proud about ourselves.
Good, thank you. Shiromal, I know you have faced lots of crises, so let me see, was this the best test for you in terms of survival?
We've had, as you say, so many from the time I remember joining the industry, but this was the worst, I can tell you. So the biggest challenge for us was keeping the people engaged, because they even if they came to work or working from home, they really had nothing to do. So keeping everybody engaged, motivated, and some people were actually getting depressed because is there a future? As Anamali was saying, people were losing jobs, and so some companies were closing down. So keeping ourselves motivated and then keeping the staff motivated was a huge challenge. And again, as I said, people rallied around, and they did wonderfully. So that was quite a challenge. But we found various things to do, and projects, as I said before, that we all of us got together and did. And most of them, I would say 80% were not money-making ventures. They were all more to do with the society, the environment we lived in, the communities. We also have hotels in various locations. So we worked with communities, got them involved, so that made sure they had a livelihood. So our people felt, again, as Sashi said, they also felt empowering, that we were empowering somebody else. We had our own issues, but we didn't think of it as something that we were only doing. We found that communities around us were suffering more. So all of us got together and we helped them, like Kadruketa in Vellavae or Sigiriya. So many farming communities, we were able to help them and, get them to different standards. We were doing the organic farming. So we were very happy that our teams felt that they were also contributing something to the economy, And so that is how whether it was a chauffeur guide, whether it was somebody who was doing gardening in a hotel, the ability we had to get them all together, and we didn't close a single of our hotel. We kept them all going. So, but imagine now we had a situation soon after the first lockdown, hotels were getting filled up, and call centers were working, the reservation people were very busy, and suddenly 2 weeks later, everything got cancelled. So just imagine what they feel. So it's, I don't know, it was amazing. I cannot imagine. So 31st March this year, I thought to myself, we finished the worst year we've had, and I couldn't believe that we got through the 12 months. And I thought, okay, from now onwards things will get, but then third wave hit. So here we are. We're still alive and smiling, Nista.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. You spoke about, you mentioned about moving into organic. You think going forward, would you focus more on agriculture or producing, and you might end up being a supplier of organic fruits and vegetables? Is that happening?
Actually, in a way, because we also have some land which we had bought for hotels. So we will not be putting, obviously, any more hotels in the near future. So Hiran has just started doing the agriculture work.
So we need to call you as farmers, not hoteliers.
Hiran will be the main farmer. So we started doing it in Trincomalee, in Kandy. So we are
Excellent.
going
Okay,
into organic farming.
Right. Okay. Thank you very much. Moving on to the industry issues, I think that these are the real issues. So, Sandhamini, can I come to you? You said that things have improved. What's the kind of outlook given the pandemic? We did hear recently from central bank surveys that buying has come back to the real estate property market. You feel it has managed to overcome the sort of impact of the pandemic?
Yeah, one side again there's issue, but sales because of the interest rates and all, it's working for us very well because now because of the rates they don't want to keep their deposits, so they want to go for assets, right? In the other way, this is the best time to go for a bank loans because interest rates are so low. In the same way, the constructions, there are so much of import restrictions are there. Now we are struggling with that because now if you control the imports, in the same way you have to control the price in local market also. Now most of the materials, without those materials, there's no place to source it here in the same quality and quantity. Because of these restrictions, the prices are going up. It's very bad. With some products, it's almost double. And overall, it's 50% price increments is there. So we are struggling with that, but the thing is, at least the bigger players, somehow they can manage it. But there are hundreds of small developers in this country. So what happened to them? How can they survive? I think if that's okay, we can understand about with the dollar rate and because of the local manufacturers, up to some extent you have to do it. But in the same way, you have to control the price as well. So that is, we are struggling. I hope near future we can.
Okay. So two things. One is that you're having difficulty in selling. Also, then the pandemic came at the time when people thought that Sri Lanka is overbuilding in terms of apartments, and there is a glut of apartments. Do you agree with that view, or you feel that given the demand, future demand, our pipeline of apartments are okay, or have you overbuilt?
I don't think, because now when we get luxury ones, sometimes we have to say up years because of these issues. Nobody wants to, even foreigners don't want to come and buy, invest here. But why we are thinking only near future, only another 1 or 2 years? There are even after 5 years things can be changed. But other mid-rise and affordable luxury category,
There is
that's
no
not
problem.
true. There is a requirement.
Shiromal, most talked sector, tourism, is there sort of a light at the end of the tunnel? We have had false starts. Do you see, I see that government is keen to resume tourism. One is, do you see it's coming back in terms of faster revival, or you feel that we might have some dangerous developments in terms of opening the country for tourism?
Yeah, I definitely see a revival and a future for tourism. I've always believed in tourism, and as a family we believed in it, and we believed in the country. So to answer your question, are we doing it too soon? I think there are two reasons. One, I think the country needs foreign exchange. We are at a situation where it's an open secret that we do need it, and tourism is one of the quickest ways to earn the foreign exchange. So I think we don't seem to have too many options left but to revive tourism. But having said that, it has to be done in a responsible way. I do agree that we can't just get anybody and everybody and just put them anywhere. So we need to have the new normal you were talking of and look at all the precautions. I think the Tourist Development Authority has set out a lot of guidelines, and KPMG is doing audits. So putting all of that in perspective, we are ready. The tourism industry is ready because they've been doing this now for the last 6 to 8 months. But I think as a country, we need to decide, do we want to keep it close like say New Zealand, Australia, or do we want to do like a Singapore model where we have a control but an open country? So unless somebody is decisive and makes that decision, and all the other people are aligned towards that, whether it's the health authority, the other line ministries, the private chambers, the business houses, all of us and the public must believe in it. Otherwise, it's not going to work, because I think we have become people who are opposing anything that comes without. So I don't know whether it's the people's fault or the fault of the leaders for not communicating a message properly. So if we are to go into tourism, I think we need to tell everybody that tourist is not going to be the cause of the COVID virus. Tourists didn't bring, even they were talking about the Delta variant, that it came from an Indian tourist. It didn't, because the Delta variant came to the country only about a month or two ago. And at that time, not a single Indian came to Sri Lanka. So I think these misconceptions have to be corrected, and somebody responsible must inform and educate our people. And if everybody is getting involved, religious leaders are getting involved. There is nobody who is not having an opinion. So whilst these opinions should be welcomed, I think someone should take the bull by the horns basically and say, this is it. This is the path we are taking, and then get everybody aligned. And other countries have done it, New Zealand, Australia, okay, in a different way, but whatever the decision, it has to be a firm decision, get the entire country aligned to it, and I don't see a problem. So to answer your question, yes, tourism should be done, I think, and it's going to really boom in the next 2 to 3 years.
Okay. Two questions. One is that when there was this government-backed initiative by a former ambassador of Sri Lanka of bringing as a pilot project, country was divided, and then that led to a lot of controversies. Then recently the French naval 750 people, then there were again questions about why opening up these sites for foreigners and closing it for the locals. How do you find a balance in this, particularly when you need it? And remember also then this question about first, after the second wave, we were trying to position Sri Lanka as a safe destination, but today we are in the red list. Flights are being banned. So where did we get it wrong? I'm not finding fault, but how can we sort of unravel this whole mystery of lots of forward steps and backwards to move to a more consistent messaging and consistent procedure to attract tourists as well as safeguard local lives?
Yeah. So I think if once we open the country, like now for example England also went through the same thing. They opened and then they had to go back. US I think is also similar. They took off all the mask mandate and now some of the states are bringing it back. So that may happen is that from time to time we may have to take 2 steps forward, 1 step back, or 1 step forward, 2 steps back. But in that context, the things you mentioned about the Ukrainian charter, perhaps some things were done hastily. Maybe they were done secretively, or maybe I remember there was a situation where the tourism authority said they were not involved in it. So there may have been issues like that, which unfortunately creates this situation. So I don't see why it should be done secretively. If everything is done openly, if everybody gets a chance to participate in something in a fair way, there shouldn't be a problem. So unfortunately, when there is always a doubt, as I said, we are a nation like that. Maybe things that have happened in the past makes us very suspicious and skeptical, and for anything you think, oh, there's something here, something there, somebody's making money. That it can be, it cannot be sometimes. So it's sad, but what to do?
Okay. One tricky question. Apparel sector got benefit from the PPE, there is this notion that hotel sector got benefit because of the quarantine. Now that's fine, but there is a lot of criticism that the hotels are charging hefty amounts for that 14-day or 17-day. Is it decided? Do you have any say in the decision on the quarantine packages, or is it entirely decided by the task force or the government?
Okay, I'm glad you asked that question, Esther, because at the beginning, when I think Hemas, Jetwing, I think also John Keels and Citrus, when we offered the hotels, we were not expecting anything. We never expected us to be paid. I'm sure the others did, but I can speak on behalf of Jetwing. We offered the hotels saying we will give it for quarantine sector. Then when the government came back, the armed forces came back and said, okay, we would take your hotels and we would give you money for it. So we asked, how much can you pay? So they said they are spending 7,000 rupees a day on meals. So we said, okay, give us that amount, that's fine, because if you could do it for 7,000, we can do for 7,000 too. So that's how the 7,500 rupees per day per person came, and then it became 15,000 for 2 people. And then, so that's how that amount came. And I don't think it's exorbitant, because there are lots of other costs involved, because you have to give some of the medical people, the army, certain free rooms, because they have to be involved there. then the staff who are working have to be quarantined for another 14 days. So they have to be kept and fed. So the quarantine business gave cash flow, but I don't think anybody made money as such, not to the best of my
Right,
knowledge.
okay, thanks. I'll come to Sashi, but Kasturi, I mean, you did exit the sector, leisure sector. Do you think, looking back, was it a sort of a, luckily you're out of it, or you feel that it was a conscious decision whether there was pandemic or not, Hemas was moving out of leisure?
So it was a decision way before the pandemic on a portfolio view of where we allocate capital, and leisure didn't seem to be too close. Either you have to go all in or not. And we didn't believe that's the best use of our capital. So we decided to actually divest way before the pandemic. Unfortunately, one deal, we divested the aviation and the small travel companies just before. The hotel deal just fell through because of the pandemic, but we subsequently divested. So it's a portfolio decision we made, and in some ways it kind of helped us to focus on what we were good at and what was core to us, and didn't get distracted with the challenges Shiromal is having now. So that was the reason.
Okay. Sashi, lots of issues. Let me start with, in terms of, I'm going to give you 3 items which you can comment. One is the foreign exchange crisis. What's the exact situation? Do we have a crisis, or is just opposition saying, we don't have reserves? And money printing, which is another associated with the banking sector. These 2 questions, can you respond? I'll come to the other industry issues.
Okay. Foreign exchange issue, let me put it this way. Say I'm a salary earner and I have my expenses. Then suddenly my employer says that I have to take a 25% haircut. I have my expenses. I have my daily expenses, as well as, let's say, I have a loan also to service. Maybe I think it is a short-term thing, and I try to borrow short-term, maybe from friends, maybe from my family members. The problem goes on like that, and then it continues. I can't go back and borrow again. Then I have to curtail some of my expenses. What country going through is also somewhat similar, Nista. So Shiromal also said, now this tourism issue is 3 years, from 2019 onwards. And that was an industry which brought in about $4 billion per annum. So all in all, I think we have been deprived of that $12 billion. Can you imagine the situation of a country? And that's one issue. The second issue is, if not for the pandemic, the country, Sri Lanka, as usual, would have gone to the outside market and would have borrowed money. And we used to have a system of rolling over our debt. And that pandemic created that environment was gone. And had we gone to the market, the price that we had to pay would have been very, very high, because we know at what discount our the sovereign bond is trading. So when those both avenues got drained, what is the country going to do? We have to curtail our imports. So that is what you see today is as a foreign currency crisis. I would say, I don't know whether the right word is crisis. This is again, I would say it's transitionary. We have to manage. So what banks do here is that we prioritize payments. We daily manage our inflows with outflows. So we try to give benefit to majority, not giving a special treatment or finding one few large importers. So country also took certain measures by banning certain items, considered luxury items. That government took that step quite early because they knew that this was coming in, and it has come to a kind of a difficult situation now. But I believe the way that Shiromal is also explained, the country will open up soon with all these health restrictions. And when foreign tourism starts, that amount of inflow will come in. I believe and I pray that we would be able to open to some extent towards the end of this year, so that at least we will capture part of the higher season. As Sri Lanka used to get, I think, about nearly 2 billion, I would say, during this, say, to December to March season. So if we can capture that season, we might be somewhat better in managing the situation.
On money printing, that's another controversial thing. I mean, is it, I know government has explained, but how is the banking industry, how is it impacting the banking industry in general?
Nista, when you have a problem at your hand, you have to solve that first. When the pandemic hit, if there was no liquidity in the system, the situation would have been worse than what we are facing today. So not only our country, I think all the countries, even the superpowers, started printing money.
Yes.
So you can't basically blame the government for printing money. That was needed. Now government mechanism to collect revenue was stopped because they could not go and demand taxes. On the other hand, the government expenditure also increased. Say how many people that they had to feed. And this PCR, the test, and even the vaccinations that we are bringing in now, all that is additional expenses government had to incur, and those expenses are not recurring in nature. They are one-off, I would say, the payments, and therefore the country has to print money for the continuity. Otherwise, we would have seen people coming onto the roads because people can't starve. And companies, the small enterprises have to continue. So infusing that amount of money to the system was inevitable.
Okay.
And that was the right decision.
Okay.
But your second question, I think what you wanted is how it impacted the
Yeah.
banking system.
Yes.
Banking system is heavily liquid. That is also shows the strength of the banking system. Had the banks gone out of liquidity, people would have rushed and tried to draw that money, and that would have caused a further chaos. So, but we need to understand one thing is, before the inflationary measures come in, government has tools to manage, and they will manage in such a way so that inflation could be controlled.
Okay.
But I need to reiterate what government did by printing money is the right thing.
Okay, fine. One last question. I know in travel industry is asking for a haircut. Would banks, what's the position? There's an exposure about 300 billion from the travel tourism industry. I think today papers had it about either write off the debt or write off the interest. I mean, is that a sort of a fool's wish? Or can the banks really help the industry?
Nista, industry, yes, yeah.
You're going live.
Industry,
You're going
yes.
live.
It's okay, yeah. Industry is not dead. Industry is there, and we are hopeful for revival. Banks, I know there's a lot of criticism and blame on the banks, that bank makes a lot of profits, but why can't they take a haircut? But we are dealing with public money. We are the trustees of public money, and the banking industry stability is also important. Today, if you look at, because we talk about the tourism industry so much, because they face this, the problem started for them from 2019 onwards. But the pandemic hit, the COVID-19 impact is there for most of the industries. If you take even the construction industry, and their problems also started from 2018 onwards. So all these stress assets are now reflected in the banks. So we are somehow managing. I of course see the light at the end of the tunnel. There is revival. This country has to survive by bringing in tourism, and that we are very optimistic about it. So once that happens, I think these stress properties will start paying. But in the interim, I understand, and we have been helpful to that industry, and these continuous moratoriums came in, and banks continue to extend those moratoriums because we want that industry to come back. Now, when is the question? And when the first moratorium was given, I think the regulators also didn't extend it for 2 years because they were also hopeful that it will be revived.
Yes.
So likewise, I think we have come to an end, in my opinion. So I'm sure this industry will bounce back and they will start servicing to some extent. In the interim, as you said, yes, if government or some authority is going to give some guarantees, and if that can support our impairment, because I believe these properties need some more money. I think if we are to capitalize on the
Revival,
opening
yeah,
up to capture that tourism demand that will be there, they might need more money. And I believe maybe the equity holders have drained themselves because they have been to an extent looking after the employees without zero income coming in. Finance sector would be able to support them, but we believe that there will be some kind of a guarantee or support that would come from the regulators or the government, because this tourism income is extremely important for our country.
Sure. Thanks. Kasturi, I'll move on to you from a conglomerate perspective. We spoke about import control. I wanted to tackle that, what kind of an impact it's having. Government started with saying short term, it's more than a year, and it's likely to get extended with different restrictions. Then also I wanted to comment on the government push for import substitution. You're coming from a pharmaceutical industry. That's another industry that government is really pushing to reduce imports. What's the kind of overall outlook from a diversified blue chip?
So Nista, the fundamental in the short term, whether it is import control or import substitution, the dollar is a bigger issue. The dollar rate, the exchange rate, as well as the access to the funds. From a domestic market point of view, for domestic manufacturers, the issue is how do they plan? Because we are a small market. We rely on global supply chain for commodities, for all raw materials. Globally, prices have gone up. We have a challenge here economically, and it has been, the pandemic kind of aggravated it with so many people going out of jobs. So the affordability point is very important, it's very sensitive for them. But there are so many things which are beyond our control. So for example, the exchange rate is beyond your control. The global price of raw materials is beyond your control. You have fuel going up by 30%. You have DFA, which is the price of soap raw material, gone up by 50-60%. But you can't pass through all that. So the challenges are immense, and they are willing to, as domestic market, you can take certain haircuts by being more efficient, re-engineering the sizes of products, even the formulations. But the challenge of consistently knowing how you can access the product is important. I think the policy consistency, whether you are allowed to import it, whether you can plan your manufacturing, that is a big challenge for us. On the healthcare, from manufacturing, I guess this is something which is has to be sorted, because at the end of it, everything rolls back into the cost of production and rolls back into a price of a product. And you can't keep, I beg to differ, I don't think you can control interest rates, you can control exchange and control inflation. Something has to give. You can't, and this country needs to let go the tap. It'll burst at one point, the tap has to open at one point. Which tap is the most one you can open? But I think somebody told before, is the problem we have now in the country is nobody can do the right thing by the country, because the other side is anyway going to complain for the sake of complaining. I wish everybody can get to a page and say what's right by the country. Let's keep quiet and just only protest if you think it's wrong by the country. And let the country resurrect. We as people, we need that. For import substitution, long term, I think this is a way forward. But the short term, remember, even the raw materials for local manufacturing comes from the world, right? We don't have for pharmaceuticals, everything for API, which is the biggest cost element, comes from outside. And again, being the small country we are, if it's only for domestic manufacturing, we can never be competitive. We don't have the supply chain muscle to procure at that quality raw materials at the right price. So you have to have partnerships to give access to this. And the bigger plan, I think, is while we're being self-sufficient, we should have partners who will give us access to global markets. The problem we have is this domestic manufacturing is geared towards, so in the pharmaceutical industry, even though 85% is imported, most of it is imported from the state point of view. 50% of it goes to the state. And that is the element they're trying to convert it first. But the problem is, how much of science knowledge do we have for that? They pick a low-hanging fruit and we do a generic and say we are manufacturing. But that's short term. If you want to go and be relevant, you have to get partnership, bring the sciences in. It can't be one-off things. But I believe that is something every country which has to make sure that patients have access to good quality, affordable, has to have reliance and self-sufficient of the essential drugs to a certain level domestically done. But for that, you need to don't feel ashamed, bring up global partner, tell them I'll give you so much of tax holiday. You set up a state-of-the-art plant. So you're anchoring it around that. You get the sciences, you get our people trained. Our people have to know the processes. It's not like a shampoo factory. Pharmaceutical, it is absolutely technical, from the construction to the process to the equipment. Let's leapfrog, get it in, and get the sciences in. So short term, there's no easy answer. Short term, we are relying on external people. Policy should actually understand that. So if you look at the healthcare policy at the moment, we are running through pharmaceuticals is without a pricing mechanism. We have suppressed essentials at a price which was done 2 years ago with the greatest difficulty they're holding. So if you go out and you have shortages, you go and buy it from the grey channel. The big simple answer is that you're trying to make people happy, but you're trying to say, is the happiness by increasing it by 10% or keeping the price stagnant, or just saying the product is not available? So during pandemic, you have to have a sensible policy for the short term, and then you kind of build on it to, if you want to be self-reliant or to at least have majority of the essentials being produced, have the correct partnerships for that.
Okay, thank you. We have sort of exceeded our 1 hour, but let me just, interesting comments. But my last question to the panel is, assuming you get an audience with the cabinet tomorrow, Sandhamini, what would be your one advice to ensure a faster revival? Imagine this is your only chance to get things right, and they're going to listen to you.
If I say very simply, if I don't have money to feed my family, I don't do any fancy renovations and things like that. This is the best time, and you have to do all the unnecessary cost and focus on what we can get benefits immediately. Focus on those industries and support them and invest for that. That is the only thing I can tell them.
I'll come to you, Kasturi. You just spoke. Shiromal, what would be your advice?
Yeah, so I would say
The idea is best to ensure that we recover faster, more safer.
yeah, so I would ask them to make a decision, whatever the decision. We have to have a leader who would, and then as people, we have to listen to the decision and ask everybody else to please abide by that decision, right or wrong. It doesn't matter. I mean, be fun. A leader can make a wrong decision, but he should be decisive. So please make the decision. Everybody else will support that decision, and let's go get on with it.
Kasturi,
just to add on to Shiroma, while you make the decision, let's have one spokesperson. I think we've gone through life with too many people. I can't, even if I have it in the company, it'll be a big problem. So be clarity, transparency. Let's be honest. You wouldn't believe people will accept honesty in the most amount. I think one thing I will say, if I step back a bit, from country perspective, we talked so much about our liability and the problem in the economy, right? Why don't we look at the government balance sheet? We talk about all the loans. Why don't we talk about the assets? Why can't we monetize these assets? That's also a way of getting a huge amount of inflows, right? You have the state banks, you have assets which are non-core, monetize it, put it in the stock exchange, get the inflow, make them more efficient. Why are we not talking about that? We are just, the private sectors are doing whatever they can, and the exporters, we've been talking about the obvious choices. But this is an obvious asset we've got, and I think that's something you could look at.
Thank you. Sashi, what would be your advice?
Kasturi said about monetizing the assets. Yes, I would think that that's a way going forward.
Yeah, I think
but I would want to say that, for the GDP growth, the SME sector is quite important. What we see here is sometimes there's a blame on the bank saying that we don't extend finance into the SME sector.
It was mentioned here as well.
Yes. The fact is, more than that, I think the SME sector, because of the changing policies today, sometimes it's very difficult to run a business. Cost of running a business is very high in Sri Lanka for the fact that there are external factors. When we evaluate a business itself is feasible and we can fund it, but suddenly you find the external factors. Because of the impact of the external factors, the business fails. So therefore, any financier becomes quite jittery and thinks twice whether we should lend to that proposition. So the stability in making policy decision is the key. So they have to be very concerned about this SME sector when they are making decisions, because that is the engine of growth.
Okay, thank you very much. Lots of advice, I'm sure, for everyone who is watching this, and for people who will eventually watch again what will be recorded and in our media outlets, including the FT website and the Daily Mirror online. I'd like to thank, on behalf of the Daily FT, for all the panelists, all the business leaders we have here. In being very frank, I would say I was expecting more sort of very formal answers, but no, they got out of their comfort zones and gave lots of very frank and sometimes controversial answers. Thank you very much for the insights, both from personal traits as well as what the industry challenges and how Sri Lanka can really use this as an opportunity to transform and perhaps achieve much desired higher growth. So thank you very much for everyone watching us on live, and we will again meet with you with another series of Leaders League in the near future. Thank you very much.